Let's also get you details of what's happening in Japan as Prime Minister Modi is in Japan for the state funeral of the former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe.
Palestina, then Shisho. His Excellency, the former Prime Minister of Palestine. Denmark Ohoku, Nikai Gicho. His Excellency.
Well, Prime Minister Modi laying the wreath. He is attending the state funeral, and Prime Minister Modi is among several other world leaders who are part of this funeral that has been organized. Prime Minister Modi also spoke a few words about Shinzo Abe and fondly recalled the relationship that he shared. In fact, Prime Minister Modi has often spoken about the close association that he had with Shinzo Abe, also talking about how under his rule, India and Japan ties got much better. Now, the state funeral is currently underway after the attack on Shinzo Abe on the 8th of July. There are more than 400 foreign guests who have flown in for the funeral, including 50 current and former state leaders. Prime Minister Modi, remember, had also penned a personal note for Shinzo Abe when he was assassinated. Now, for the state funeral today, there are leaders from across the world who have arrived in Tokyo for the event. Dignitaries also include the U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris and Singapore Prime Minister, the Vietnamese President, South Korean Prime Minister, and other leaders. Like we mentioned, 50 current and former state leaders are part of this event. In the meeting that he had earlier today with the Japan Premier, Kishida, Prime Minister Modi spoke about his association with Shinzo Abe, and he said that under the current Prime Minister as well, the India-Japan partnership should continue in the vision that Shinzo Abe had for the two countries. He spoke about the conceptualization of the vision of a free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific region. It's a very somber moment as the world leaders recall Shinzo Abe, remember him for the leader that he was. In Japan as well, it's the end of an era. Well, these are the live visuals from the spot, from the event site, and for Prime Minister Modi, it's a personal tribute because he considered Shinzo Abe a good friend. Maruf Raza joining us on the broadcast. Mr. Maruf Raza, this is also a very personal tribute for the Prime Minister. He has spoken, he has been vocal about the kind of relationship that he shared for Shinzo Abe.
The Prime Minister Modi had a relationship with Japan and Mr. Abe, as far as I know, even before he became Prime Minister of India. He had made several trips to Japan when he was the Chief Minister of Gujarat. And Japan was one country which was not marginalizing him like his newfound friends in America. Second thing was that Mr. Shinzo Abe had actually altered Japan's foreign policy approach and their stance on issues connected with military and security, particularly with reference to China. Quite clearly, Mr. Modi's biggest strategic challenge comes from China. And Japan was one country that had always seen China as an adversary and did no bones about it. And therefore, Mr. Shinzo Abe's efforts to counter the pacifist constitution of Japan, by which the Japanese people had forsaken the right to militarization and war. And his challenge to that has today made the Japanese society divided over whether they should mourn Shinzo Abe or they should be glad he's gone. The vote is 50-50. So therefore, there is a lot of opposition to Shinzo Abe's state funeral within Japan itself, though the world recognized him as a very important statesman. India in particular saw him as a very good friend, both strategically and economically. There was a day's national mourning when he passed away, and also the fact that Mr. Modi, while not having gone for the Queen's funeral, has made it a point to be there for Shinzo Abe's funeral, where many other heads of state and governments have come. So clearly, it's a very important personal engagement and tribute that Mr. Modi is paying to the born Japanese leader, whose footprint will be larger than many others. He apparently was also credited with the longest stay in the position of Prime Minister in Japan's modern history. So Shinzo Abe has a lot of firsts to his credit. He was clearly a friend of India and a friend of Mr. Modi. And it's no surprise that Mr. Modi is paying huge tributes to him. Back to you.
Right, and the significance of it as well, because it's not just Prime Minister Modi, 50 world leaders, over 700 guests, like you mentioned, in Japan. This has run into a bit of controversy for the grand ceremony, but politically, we're also seeing Prime Minister Modi being among the 50 world leaders, including the US Vice President Kamala Harris.
Yes, she's there. Mr. Biden isn't there. That has come as a surprise to me, because Biden did go for the Queen's funeral, where I think his engagement with the long-gone British Queen was much lesser than his engagement with the Japanese leadership. And Japan has been America's very important strategic partner since World War II. America has actually thrust upon Japan a constitution where Article 6 of the Constitution renounces war and conflict, and therefore the Japanese sentiment against Shinzo Abe for having tried to take the country into a stronger militaristic approach. But that having said, Shinzo Abe was also responsible for pledging important loans to India, initiating projects like the fast-track train from Ahmedabad to Bombay, and another one in South India. So his lists of firsts are enormous, and I think India will always remember him as a friend. What is interesting is he is being referred to as the Quad father, which means the person who initiated the idea of Quad, which, as you know, has become a very important point of discourse now in India and in some other countries, where the Chinese see the Quad combination of India, US, Australia, and Japan as a very clear signal to the Chinese that these four countries have ganged up against China. Also, he had initiated trade arrangements like the Comprehensive Trade Arrangement for Asia, all of which will have very long-term significance for the region.
Right. I also want to take your view on the statement that Prime Minister Modi made as he met the Premier Kishida. Prime Minister Modi said that after arriving in Japan, I felt even more sad because the last time he was here, he had a conversation with Shinzo Abe. But he also mentioned Indo-Japan relations currently, saying India and Japan relations will deepen further, and the two countries will be able to play an appropriate role in finding solutions to the problems of the world.
Well, problems of the world, I will take the last point first, is essentially problems of the South or the Third World, where India is emerging as a leader, and Japan was willing to see India as somebody that would help the non-China influenced part of the world to emerge as successful economies, mostly in Africa, where Japan and India are working closely. And of course, the stronger the Indian economy becomes, the more India can influence countries which are friendly to India, notwithstanding China's Belt and Road Initiative, which both India and Japan have strongly opposed.
Right, and Quad was one of the achievements you mentioned, one of the brainchild of Shinzo Abe in the legacy that he leaves behind in completely transforming the India-Japan relations. That forms really the crux of it, isn't it?
Yes, Quad isn't the crux of India-Japan relationship. It was one of his big initiatives which everyone fell in line with. But India-Japan initiatives are multiple, and this can be seen in the sector of trade and investment partnerships that already exist. It is Japan really investing in India. India not necessarily bringing in the kind of economic heft that Japan can, but India can gain from its partnership with Japan. And the stronger India is, we become the two poles of countries in Asia that are surrounding China and making China difficult to get on with its role on the world stage, with Mr. Abe had predicted very early and attempted to counter. Sadly, the world, especially the Western world, had a half-hearted approach to countering China because they benefited from China's supply chains and the cheap products China made.
His own brand is concerned, he was a fierce nationalist, and it was during his tenure that Japan started building up on its defense forces like it had not done in a long time.
Yes, Japan has something called self-defense forces. So these forces are essentially for the self-defense of Japan. But that is basically a hidden terminology because America's nuclear forces are also parked on the coast of Japan. And Japan has the advantage of American nuclear umbrella and a partnership with America that if there is an attack on some countries that Japan has a partnership with, Japan could get involved there, like Taiwan, which in turn will bring America into the conflict scenario. So the whole strategic thing with America is very complicated. With India, it's a straightforward relationship in terms of Japanese engagement with India in economy and trade. But the Japanese see India as a very strong pillar that they can engage with in Asia, considering the fact that China has been a great disruptor in the last decade.
Right. Mr. Maruf Raza, thank you for joining us on the broadcast. I also want to bring in Mr. Arasan Singh, who is joining us. Mr. Singh, we were talking about the personal brand of Shinzo Abe, what he has done to transform Japan during his tenure. Also, of course, for India, what it meant, Prime Minister Modi as well, talking about him as a personal friend, because under Abe, the relations between New Delhi and Tokyo had improved tremendously.
Indo-Japan relations after World War II. We don't remember names of many prime ministers. Prime ministers of Japan have come and gone as far as India is concerned. But here is one name, Shinzo Abe, which has made its presence in every Indian mind and in the Indian consciousness. And the reason for that was, one is that his love for India, the strategic, common strategic cause that the two countries made in his stewardship. He was one of the main architects of Quads. He was a key player of Indo-Pacific strategy. And these are all enduring mechanisms and institutions set by Shinzo Abe.
Yes.
And his warmth for India and his personal rapport with the Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, was palpable.
Yes, and that's something that the Prime Minister also spoke of. In fact, a personal note when he passed away, and also as he arrived, he said that he felt deeply saddened. Mr. Arasan Singh, thank you for joining us on the broadcast.